Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing vanilla Ariadna versus Torchlight Brigade, and the scenario is corporate appropriation. Now, this list will be familiar to people who have watched my recent video on all of the new scenarios and a list for each of those new scenarios. It is the Ariadna list built specifically for corporate appropriation. In this scenario, there is a relatively limited need for actual specialist troopers. Anything that is mobile and get up the field can do most of what you need in the mission, especially if it has the ability to deploy anti-material weapons or in particular decharges. And so this list is built to be very aggressively focused, first on attacking the objectives and on defending the objectives, and then, if need be, actually penetrating the opponent deployment zone with a plan to destroy an enemy objective, technically the friendly objective, even if your opponent has stolen it and gotten it all the way back to their DZ. With that in mind, and in that vein, we have a second combat group, or a smaller combat group, consisting of a Visceral Neurokinetics AP sniper rifle, a Tractor Mule Uragan with total reaction. There are actually two of these in this list. A Dozer KVP, that's an engineer with an electronic, his Kibbervolk with a chest mine and Crazy Koala, and then two dynamos, no special ones in this particular case, none of the upgrades. These are the cheapest 14-point profiles with submachine guns, Panzerfaust, and then most importantly, smoke grenade launchers and mine dispensers because they are dynamos. In Combat Group 1, we then have Colonel Voronin, a Polaris team, Masha and the Bearpode, the Unknown Ranger. A question that was actually asked in the previous video was, hey, would you consider swapping the Unknown Ranger out for a model like Jacques Bruant instead? Bruant is a bit of a worse gunfighter. He does have surprise, but otherwise he's worse overall. He's much less durable, but he still has an AP Spitfire and he is an infiltrator with decharges. I've stuck with the Unknown Ranger in this case because this list is light on orders in Group 2 because it's got so much sunk into Margot and Duroc will be off the field, at least at the beginning of the game. Having just one extra tactical awareness, I found pads that combat group out to a point where I can rely on it a little more to do something if either it is not yet Margot and Duroc time, or if Margot and Duroc time has passed. You definitely could consider replacing the Unknown Ranger with Bruant, but this is Ariadna and it's fragile enough already. I wanted the more durable model with the tactical awareness order. We then have Margot and Duroc, a Desperado. A Desperado is a piece I would consider changing in this list. I think there's some argument for turning it all the way down into just a 5-point Galwegian, because there's a lot you can do with 2 points in this case. I would really like a second electronic, because then we have a Tractor Mule. So there are two Tractor Mules with total reaction and a Vistral, and there is just one engineer and one electronic. And having an extra peripheral would go a long way in letting me flexibly deploy all of these like total reaction elements that I'm using to try and pin my opponent back. Finally, we have a Scout Mine Layer. This is present because it's got decharges and an EM mine. The EM mine would be, actually it wouldn't detonate this game, but its presence would be very valuable because there is only so much you can do to stop a model like a Hellblazer or some other Torchlight Brigade heavy infantry moving towards you with a shock mine, but you can stop it with an EM mine. Also, the Scout has decharges, which would be very pertinent in this mission. So this is built specifically for corporate appropriation. I think you could feasibly play it in some other missions, but to do so, and I know you can because I've played similar versions, but to do so you need to get specialists back into this list. This list has specialists only kind of by accident. For example, the Unknown Ranger is technically a specialist, not what you are looking for a more specialist-centric scenario, but for corporate appropriation, it's totally fine. If you want to hear a little bit more about this list and how the scenario plays, you can jump back to that video that I did and find the section on corporate appropriation. But for now, we're playing this against Torchlight Brigade. Now, this Torchlight Brigade is, by the admission of my opponent, a little bit of an experiment. Torchlight Brigade are a faction that kind of lean towards not necessarily a mono build, but you will usually like pick 2 or 3 of 4 or 5 good things. And after that, the lists tend to kind of fill themselves out. There's a lot of middleweight stuff in Torchlight Brigade, things like Moonrakers, for example, stuff in the 12 to 20 point range that just sort of then kind of neatly populates a list. This is trying to go against the grain a little bit and run a list that relies a lot more on camouflage and kind of shorter range weapons and close assault and orders and mobility. And I think it's missing basically just one thing, which is visibility to control to make that work. Now, Torchlight Brigade is not swimming in visibility control, but a change that I talked to my opponent about, and which he was able to kind of finagle into the list, is just getting some disco balls into this list. Because you'll see as we go through, there's some cool stuff in there, but if it's pinned down, for example, by a bunch of enemy models with total reaction, it can run into some issues unless it has to use the camouflage elements to solve that. So in Combat Group 2, the smaller of the two groups, we have Hippolyta and her emotional support Cludger. This is a very good team and arguably should be in Combat Group 1. But as it would happen, Hippolyta would do just fine in this game. She does want the option of being able to go very loud very early. I think there's kind of an argument to have her in Group 1 and just put more kind of utility stuff in Group 2. So consider how you might do the group loadout here, but Hippolyta and a Cludger is one of those very good things that you can fit in Torchlight Brigade, but you can't fit, like, you start to run into, okay, look, that's 23 and 38 points. They're excellent, but that is a bunch of oxygen in the air gone. I'm happy to include them. I've made sacrifices to do so. Rounding this group out, we have a Flash Pulse bot, a Ment FTO, Chain of Command, very useful, we'll see why in a moment, and then a Kappa Hacker. This is the only regular hacker in the list, and it's just doing the job of giving you something to do with your repeaters if, for example, your opponent is playing an unhackable faction like Ariadna. In Group 1, we then have, and this is the vanity piece in this particular list, we have Jamie Rover FTO Lieutenant +1 order. She is an NCO. She is durable, she is dangerous, she has an X-Visor plasma rifle, but she is the closest thing this list has to a gun unless Hippolyta is rolling up her sleeves and using her breaker rifle. A plasma rifle, X-Visor, and mimetism with link bonuses is absolutely dangerous, and Jamie will absolutely clear out some ARO pieces over the course of this game. But is she a prime? No, she's more complicated to use, she assumes a little bit more risk, as good as plasma is. She is a vanity piece. She's cool, but there are sacrifices and concessions being made here to try her out. What she does do is get you an NCO with a bunch of lieutenant orders, which is very cool. Is she worth 49 points? Not quite, but she is surprisingly close. She's in a link team with a Wave Rider KHD. This is a piece that you're probably looking at cutting in future iterations of this list. As good as the Wave Rider is, this is not a list that's trying to be a hacking list. And you can replace this with a Psychop killer hacker with disco balls if you find just a few points. The fact that the Psychop is a killer hacker is not really the important thing here. Cool, technically it keeps you a KHD in the list, even though you lose the picture. What is important is the Psychop has disco balls. It's still a specialist, but it adds visibility control to this fire team, which this fire team really wants. As much as, yes, Jamie has an X-Visor, you are much better off fighting with her in good range, and that means getting close. And ideally, you're even doing things like getting into close combat, which again warrants the ability to put down Eclipse templates. From here, we have basically just a hellscape of camouflage markers. 2 Moonraker mine layers, 2 Striders, one of which is a mine layer. Now, in this game, we will be playing by accident both Striders as mine layers. There was a very last minute finagle where I'm like, oh, if you've got points spare, you should make the Oko into tactical awareness. The Oko, which you'll see further down, is a tac aware model. We play it that way in this game, but I think my opponent was 1 point short of making that upgrade as it actually happened. A little bit last minute. Not the end of the world. Bear in mind that there will appear to be a deployable repeater on the field. We won't mention it further other than this. It wasn't relevant to the game. It's also not hugely valuable to what the list is trying to do, since the list is not trying to do defensive hacking that much, and it has 2 repeaters in the DZ. So a bit like, ultimately, no skin off anyone's back, just be aware if you see a deployable repeater hanging around the field somewhere, that's why it's there. In this case, how the list will actually work is 2 Striders, one of which is a mine layer, both of which are specialists. We then have an Oko Takaware, just a useful piece that will do a lot this game, a 360 Visor Warcore, and a Raven Eye. Overall, obviously as an O12 list, as a Torchlight Brigade list goes, this is making concessions. It doesn't have any kind of a big gun. It has no Wrecker, it has no Prime. But I do think a list like this can work if you just make that change, cut the Wave Rider, put in the Psychop KHD. It is making some concessions still, but it's much more playable at that point, although it would do totally okay over the course of this game, and it would certainly flex itself in a few different ways. So kicking on into the game, we make our lieutenant rolls. I roll a fail, my opponent rolls a 14 and crits. What's a willpower 14 lieutenant, I think? In Torchlight Brigade, isn't everything 13? I'll just let me have a think about that. And okay, cool, I know that Jamie is coming. Immediately that tells me I have no idea how I'm going to approach this. What does she do? Is she good again? I'll get my opponent to tell me about what she does when she deploys. My opponent snap picks first turn, not unreasonable I think in this scenario. And so I am deploying second on the left side of the table as this photograph is taken. In terms of my opponent's deployments, there are just a mass of camouflage markers all the way out throughout the midfield. Nothing in the exclusion zone, obviously, but plenty of things sort of in this rectangle here. That will be 3 different mines, 2 Moonrakers and 2 Striders. The Striders are positioned very slightly more aggressively to be able to move up and forward over the course of the game, since they are the ones that are most likely to do work. The Moonrakers actually are positioned, at least one of them. This camouflage marker here is a Moonraker, just standing bold as brass, ready to take some AROs, which it will, annoyingly, at some point over the course of the game. In terms of other deployments, Hippolyta and her emotional support Cludger are deployed up here behind this sign, ready to move up and around up what will be my left flank. And then down here behind this building in my opponent's deployment zone, we have the 3-person Haris team. Now they're kind of deployed in a line, what we would call template bait, but they're going to have 2 NCO orders. They are always going to be moving up and around over the course of the first turn. It's Jamie, the Wave Rider, and the Hellblazer, pretty obviously telegraphed to move up in this direction, because I have chosen this objective here to be my friendly one. That is the one that I am trying to destroy. And then this objective on the top side of the screen as my opponent's objective. That is the one I'm trying to steal and he is trying to destroy. Now, just to note, this is a correction sort of relative to the video that was recently published. In that video, we were going off of the ITS PDF, which said that objectives could not be attacked on the first round. And in that ITS PDF, which is still current at time of recording, the pickup panoply skill has the attack label and so can't be executed on the first turn. I actually kind of like that, but on Corvus Belli's online TO platform, the scenario includes an update, which specifically carves out an exception that you can pick up, just not try and destroy the panoplies on turn 1. That is how we would play this in this game. I'm frankly not 100% sure whether I think I like it. It tends to create, I would say, a more defined rhythm to the game, and feels like perhaps it's going to make it a little bit more samey game on game, but not with any certainty. And we've had games like Supplies, for example, do that basically forever, so I'm sure it's fine. That is, however, how we would play it. Anyway, otherwise, in terms of my opponent's deployment, we have a Raven Eye hanging out down here with an EM mine nearby, the Ment agent safely down behind this building, and the Kappa hacker deployed behind this car. For my part, hanging around along the left, I picked this deployment zone mostly because it had good locations to put tractor mules and other total reaction bots, and because I felt like I could defend this objective down here and use smoke, etc. if I needed to attack the top objective. And by attack, I mean seize. And so we've started with a tractor mule courier on this rooftop. It's got a bit of a line down, bisecting the table down here, but more importantly, it's just looking around these staircases and down to pin down Hippolyta. And by pin down, I mean force her to throw smoke, but it's a 14-point model, and I'm happy to waste some orders, forcing her to throw those smoke grenades. The Unknown Ranger is down here on ground level, hanging out behind a building. He'll be ready to move up and around as he needs to. We've got 2 dynamos. One is behind this building here, and one is behind the sign. They are linked. They are hanging out near this tractor mule. They will move up and around as needed to lay down mines and throw some smoke. On this rooftop pre-reserve, we have the Dozer KVP. That is the only other place that I have an engineer nearby. One of the things that would have been really nice, for example, is to have had an electronic on this rooftop, but I do not have a second electronic. And so as my reserve drop, both the Vistral and the second Tractor Mule Uragan will both be deployed here to aggressively pin down any attempts to push around this flank. Both of them have line of sight there. That's not stacked line of sight, but the Vistral will be seen first and then the Uragan. Voronin is on ground level in this corner here, reasonably safe. He'll not be threatened over the course of the game. The Kibervolk itself is behind this planter bed. It's, again, deploying near baggage. That's kind of the plan. I sort of had always planned that this rooftop would have these pieces on it. And so it can move out and around here. But more importantly, if I have any orders spare, admittedly in this list in Combat Group 2. Combat Group 2 is strained and would like more orders, but if it has any orders spare, it can lay mad traps in and around this space just to help protect the objective and potentially approaches toward me. Finally, the Bear Pod is deployed behind this planter bed here. It can move up and around as needed. It's my most reliable source of smoke, and it has an anti-material weapon, just like the Kibervolk. And finally, we have the Scout deployed here, and the EM Mine Layer Mine deployed here. The Mine is protecting the objective, and the Scout kind of actually has a little bit of a line along here. It doesn't quite go as far as I'd like. More importantly, it is in a relatively safe position to move up with decharges when the time is right. Now, my opponent is going first, and my usual rule of thumb is that if Hippolyta can kick my ass, take orders away from her, because she's too terrifying to let be unleashed, and I am playing Ariadna. She has Nemetism 6. I can't kill her. But in this case, she only has 5 orders. If she spends those 5 orders and she has to throw some smoke, I'm probably going to at least stymie a turn 1 attack run until she stages herself in a later turn. And God, Jamie has a lot of orders to spend. So I take orders away from Jamie. It is going to matter a little bit. Most of my opponent's turn will be spent making the kill run with Jamie. He's not going to be able to get all the way around to this objective and steal it. Not that he would be able to on this turn anyway. No, he can. He would have been able to steal it this turn. He has a lot of orders to play with, but because he has no visibility control, he is forced into a position where he has to fight the total reaction bots. And so up Jamie comes. They move up and around here. They take a position behind this building, and then Jamie herself moves forward. Because there are multiple template models over here, there's no need to catch other pieces in the splash. Jamie is able to slice the pie and seize the visceral first, and then just takes a whole lot of face-to-face rolls. It just takes a really long time. She's firing at 0 range bands with her X rifle, X visor, damn it, X visor plasma rifle. And while she has the special die and reasonable ballistic skill and mimetism, there's just a long back and forth in which she is wounded, but does eventually put down both of these pieces. She doesn't kill them. They are both remote presence remotes. The Visceral just goes to regular unconscious. The Tractor Mule goes all the way to unconscious level 2, but both are recoverable. But that is basically all of the damage that Jamie can do. There are some orders left, but any attempt to push around in this direction would just result in 1, triggering the mine, and 2, really leaving them stranded. So they pull back to a position of safety, reoccupying the space here. Remaining orders will be spent moving the Oko Copper Bot just up and around to here in a position of usefulness for future, and getting some smoke down, basically doing the work to get Hippolyta and the Cludger a bit further up as well. This requires some smoke grenades and I think 1 cautious move as well, but she's able to get up into this position here, just staging herself a little bit, and making these kind of moves is important, right? Because, okay, she's not moved particularly far forward, but she has moved forward, and that's orders spent, particularly in a Combat Group 2 attack piece, orders spent that enable an attack in future turns. I do still think that in this list, Hippolyta should be given the option to be in combat group or the bigger combat group, because just having that full bottle of orders from the word go really makes a difference in a piece like her. But in this particular case, she's using combat group 2 orders to move up, and later, hey, maybe she will move into another combat group and do some work there. Other orders are just spent staging some of the camouflage markers a little bit, but not much, and the turn passes to me. Now, as my turn begins, okay, we've lost a couple of models. They are total reaction models. The intention was that they might potentially have to be sacrificed. We're going to try and bring them up. But before we do anything else, one of the things I have been really trying to learn as I play more and more games with Vanilla Ariadna, which I've been really enjoying, by the way. They are absolutely a challenging faction to play, but it feels like there is a ton to learn every game. And one of the deep learning curves is how and when it is Margot and Duroc time. You really want to know when to pull the trigger on them and be able to potentially pull the trigger at any time. And we're going to pull the trigger right now because my opponent has done one of the classic Land War and Asia blunders of Infinity. It's a very minor one. It's a very easy mistake to make, but as Jamie and the Hellblazer and the Wave Rider have pulled back in this direction, they are mostly concerned with watching attacks at them from this angle. There are mutually arranged cover. Jamie is facing forward, watching anything that might come around this corner. The Hellblazer is actually mostly watching the table edge and covering Jamie, and the Wave Rider is watching back in this direction. But there is a very narrow band, about that wide, where no one's line of sight is covering. And I can put Duroc there, which I do. Some dodge rolls are subsequently failed. Duroc activates, yeets around like this, and puts a template weapon down over the entire team. My opponent breaks the link. The Hellblazer and the Wave Rider both dodge, and Jamie shoots. The Wave Rider fails its dodge and goes unconscious. The Hellblazer succeeds its dodge and dodges into close combat with Duroc, and Jamie whiffs her plasma shot, fails 2 saves, and dies. Excellent work, Duroc. Now, Duroc is engaged with the Hellblazer at this point. Duroc is technically a little better than a Hellblazer at close combat, but only by the narrowest of margins. They basically sit there wiffle batting each other, CC22 versus CC23 with no other significant modifiers because the martial arts cancels. And so with his work done, I am very happy to leave Duroc to be my opponent's problem next turn. And I intend to make that a significant problem because I know that I've just put my opponent's lieutenant down, but I also know that my opponent has chain of command, a Ment agent over here. And so Margot appears here, moves up and around, cops a Riot Stopper and gets immobilized, but puts 2 shotgun hits into the Ment agent and drops it. which means that my opponent is going to be in loss of lieutenant next turn, taking out a heavy infantry HI and the chain of command in effectively 4 orders, 2 to arrive and then 2 to make the attacks. Not a bad result, even if for practical purposes both of those drop troopers had now been incapacitated. And so with that thoroughly violent opening move done, we've got more yet to accomplish. Combat Group 2 is going to shift into a support mode, where the engineer is going to run around and recover both of these total reaction pieces, the Vistral and the Uragan. It's not going to recover the Vistral back to full health, but it will get it back up from unconscious. It won't re-sapper, but it's back in position, generating order and being annoying. And the remaining orders in that group will be spent on the Dynamos, and that's only a couple of orders. Of the 6 they have, I want to say 3 to spend, and those will be spent moving, throwing smoke, and laying some mines before getting back into a safe position. The mines just come down about here, the other one misses. The important thing is that smoke goes down, and with smoke down, the unknown ranger can run up and around and grab this objective and then run back. I do have a crack at making a discover roll against one of the camouflage markers that's moved forward. It fails, and my opponent has the good sense not to try and engage the unknown ranger with submachine gun armed models at bad range, but I have the beacon. I have the beacon, I have fully reconstituted most of my forces, and my opponent is in loss of lieutenant, which makes this a very successful first turn. Very happy with it, and the game is now in a good state to carry on with. Now, as rough as this is for my opponent, he puts on an absolute clinic in playing through loss of lieutenant effectively. This is something that most of the time you won't actually get to practice. Loss of lieutenant is something that comes up particularly often, and it's often kind of backbreaking when it does, and so having opportunities to play a turn in loss of lieutenant when, yes, sure, you're down your lieutenant, maybe one other piece, which is all my opponent's lost in this case, but your force is otherwise still intact and there is plenty of time left on the game clock, like turn 2, this is just turn 2, there'll be a turn 3 after this, that's really valuable, and my opponent plays this out very well. The key, or one of the keys, to playing through loss of lieutenant is maximizing all of your irregular orders wherever you can. Simple examples are things like the Raven Eye. He's going to lay an EM mine. It might do nothing, but there are only so many command tokens available to my opponent, 3 in point of fact, and we don't necessarily want to spend all of those this turn. So hey, the Raven Eye lays a mine. Other good uses of the available orders. The Oko is just going to move forward. It's going to use its irregular and tactical awareness order to sweep out 2 of the 3 mines that I have laid in and around my opponent's Hippolyta approach. I actually had 2 mines going down that were thoroughly covering Hippolyta and the Cludger. No problem, tack aware irregular, clear out both so that the Cludger and Hippolyta aren't at risk. The Cludger in particular could very easily have gone down to those, and that's going to be important that he survives into the next turn. On this left flank, as far as my opponent is standing, there's also some fantastic use of irregular orders, and it's also here that we see our command tokens. We've got a War Correspondent and a Kieta Flash Pulse bot. Over here is a Hellblazer in combat with Durok. Now, the Hellblazer impetuous into Durok and takes a wound. Non-ideal, but it was a free activation. However, we can spend the orders here in a way that is like going to give us the best chance of a good outcome. The Warcore moves up and around, takes a Flash Pulse into Durok. Now, it misses, it hits the Hellblazer shrugs the hit, no problem. The Kaita then spends it irregular order, moves around, takes the shot. These guys are hitting on 10s, and it connects and stuns Durok. With Durok stunned, the Hellblazer can now really belt the hell out of him, because Durok can't declare attacks, which means he can't use martial arts. He's sitting there dodging on effectively 10s after modifiers as the Hellblazer just hammers into him. Now, this takes 2 command tokens, but it is the best and cleanest chance my opponent has to put Durok down, and particularly with the Hellblazer wounded, the risk of Durok finishing the job and then going on a rampage is something that he needs to be cognizant of. And so here is where he invests his command tokens. With that, with two command tokens spent, he kills Durok. And while that isn't a turn where he has a ton of forward momentum, he hasn't lost anything, he hasn't sustained significant damage, he has prepared the way for some further movements, and he even moves some camouflage markers around just to get a little bit of eyes on this objective, just having visibility down through this area, just to make it a little bit more difficult on my turn to make a clean run on that objective. This was a very well played turn through loss of lieutenant. Now, as I jump into my second turn, this is the go turn. This is the turn that we can destroy the objective, and so we're going to go after it. That is going to be the primary thrust of this turn, and it will take a little bit of time, but it's what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to use the bear pod in the first instance to run up and around. There's going to be some shenanigans here in terms of AROs and dodge and smoke failing, and then spanging a submachine gun shot. And ultimately, the bear pod is going to end up in a position where he is over here behind this building, in line of sight of a strider, but he has gotten smoke down to cover this objective, albeit having been wounded doing it. We're then going to move the scout up and around. The strider will take a discover roll. The scout will shoot and kill the strider. T2 ammunition is good, it turns out. I love Ohotniks. They're one of my favorite guns. Yes, they're only burst 2, but they are very long range. They're T2, they're damage 6. Boom, puts the strider in the ground. And then the scout continues up and around and destroys this objective. Now, at this point, you would be forgiven for thinking that this game was in the bag. And yes, it's going very well for me. I am holding the objective. I have destroyed the friendly objective, which means my opponent can't capture it. But this line of effort has taken most of my turn, and Hippolyta is still alive. Now, because I am playing Ariadna, I am in no way convinced that I can put her down with any of my tools that I have access to at the moment. All I can do is hold her back because she represents the biggest risk. And so in that vein, we are going to lay down just a ton of mines in this space. The dozer will, I think, move backwards and recover the Vistral back to full health, but the more important thing is that those two dynamos blow their entire load, which they've been reloading constantly every turn. I love the baggage in this list. I love dynamos in this list. We're going to get as many mines down in this space as we can just to put some risk on Hippolyta if she makes the run. Finally, we're going to get the Unknown Ranger into suppressive fire, and we're actually going to take a fight with an Uragan. Now, what I want to do was, with some of those orders in Combat Group 2, move the Kiba Volk up and around in this direction. Just get more stuff watching Hippolyta that might be able to slow her down or deal with her if she made a run. What actually happened was that this Moonraker revealed, I dodged, it adhesive launched at me, and I got goobered. But that allowed the tractor mule to spool up and fire a bunch of dumbfire rockets over at the Moonraker and put it down. Uragans have got really interesting range bands. They're good from 8 to 24, and then there's 0 out to 40, and that was inside 24. 3 shots later, the damn thing actually rolled 2 crits and put down a Moonraker, and at this point, any orders I can take from my opponent is going to be good. Had I any orders spare, I would also have had this Uragan come around and try and put down the Oko, but just short as it happens. There were other more important things to accomplish, and that is the Combat Group 2 Tractor Mule, and so didn't get a chance to kill it, but I have done as much as I can, and with the objective in my control and the friendly objective destroyed, that's a pretty good turn 2. Now, the tragedy of this position is I haven't killed Hippolyta, and the thing about Hippolyta is that if she is willing to make a one-way trip, it is very, very hard to stop her, especially if she has some friends. Now, let's consider the defenses I put in place. I have an Uragan watching her. I have the Unknown Ranger in suppressive fire. I have a second Uragan and a Vistral in crossfire positions if she attempts to cross this gap. And I have put more mines than God in the path of her approach. These are solvable problems. The first thing that happens is my opponent moves Hippolyta into the first combat group, or I guess the bigger group as I presented them at the beginning of this, and then the remaining troops that are available in the smaller combat group, the first of those is the Kludger, who has super jump and is quite mobile, and so he starts by jumping up onto this rooftop, which triggers 3 of the available mines and prompts arrows from the Uragan. He crits the dodge against the Uragan, but then spangs the 3 mines, but passes all 3 of his saves. Oh, that's very convenient. I guess he'll go again, and he'll jump down here and detonate 3 more mines. Now, this time around, he dies, but cool, okay, that's the first of the defensive obstacles I put in Hippolyta's way just kind of cleared, and so excellent. Now she's now going from this position here behind this building. She used her irregular order in the previous turn to cautious move across that gap. Like I said, good use of staging really pays off. So she's now in a position where she can move up and around here without first seeing the tractor mule and get some smoke down. She gets the smoke down, she moves up and around into the smoke. As she's moving, she looks for a spare order to perform net undermine. 2 attempts will not succeed as she gets up to the doorway that will carry her up onto this rooftop. At that point, however, it's go time because my opponent needs to do what he's about to do, which is come up onto this rooftop and engage the objective in CC. Now, we didn't have time to look this up during the game, so I am not 100% on either of these things. The first thing that we played it as, and someone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong here, a held beacon is still on the table. And a very quick look through the ITS could not find an injunction against attacking a held beacon. If that's wrong, let me know, because if that's the case, she would first have to have killed the Unknown Ranger. She could feasibly have done that. It might have taken slightly more orders than she had. In this case, how we played it is that she just belted the corporate appropriation target and bonked it straight to death. Now, that's the second thing that I'm not 100% sure on. There is probably a ruling about this somewhere. The Beacon, for lack of a better term, has an automated defense system, which prevents mods from being applied to a CC attribute. To my knowledge, +1 burst is not a mod to the attribute, it's a mod to the role. And so we played her as her martial arts level 4. She couldn't apply +3 to her CC against the automatic roll of 8, but she could apply +1 burst. I believe that's correct, but in the interest of not breaking the game flow, we were just like, yep, that sounds about right, let's go with that. Do correct me if that's wrong. On the assumption that it's correct, she blew the entire beacon all the way down to dead in one go. Cop suppressive fire and a tractor mule volley doing it, but actually the tractor mule can't hit her at that range because she has emetism. I think I was rolling for ones rather. So 3 dice on ones, shockingly didn't crit. Of the volley from the Unknown Ranger, looking for sixes, 1 hit landed and did wound her. And then with her final order on the rooftop, she blitzed into close combat with the Uragan. It couldn't hit her in close combat. It couldn't hit her with its guns on the way in because she would be using martial arts for a -12 modifier. So it just used its little electric pulse, which she cared not a whit about, and she blew through it as well. Now, she went unconscious at this point to the Unknown Ranger's suppressive fire, but with the Uragan down and McMurray having died in close combat, my opponent had now also accomplished Predator, which was very significant. If we flick back to just the end of my last turn, the game was looking pretty good for me. I'd seized the objective, I'd destroyed the other one. My opponent had no runs on the board. I'd even done one classified, I had combat support, and I accomplished that when I restored those remotes to health. Now, the script is flipped completely. Both objectives are destroyed, and my opponent's got more classifieds than me. Now, this has taken my opponent's entire turn to accomplish. There's nothing else that he can do. The Oko moves forward, takes a random gunfight, and dies. That's the entirety of my opponent's turn. There are no other objectives he can accomplish, having done Net Undermine and Predator, and he's not really in a position either to secure HVT. The Oko might have if it survived that gunfight. It didn't, and it's dead. I've got no classifieds done, but I'm going into my final turn, technically speaking, behind on points. And if you consider the position my opponent was in their second turn, very well done by them. Playing through Lost Lieutenant effectively, staging their pieces, and launching this attack in the final round has been really effective. Now, I do have a way clear, but okay, I've got to get clear. I even have to get multiple things out of the panoplies because the last order of my opponent's turn was their war correspondent pulling out, I forget what, whatever a 15 is, it wouldn't come up. We can, however, accomplish this. So, the first thing we need to do is accomplish classifiers. The second thing we need to do is loot 2 things out of the panoply. We'll do the final thing first. The Desperado is going to move forward and pull something out of the panoply, and then the Dynamos are going to move up and around. They'll be laying down some smoke and then closing in on the panoply, and they will also loot things from the panoplies. I only need to succeed once. I do succeed once. Cool, I've now pulled 2 things out of the panoplies to my opponent's 1. That's worth some points in this mission. With the Dynamo having laid down smoke over here, the Unknown Ranger can now get back down out of this building. Oh, they blew up the thing that I was carrying, and run up and around in this direction. His goal as a medium infantry is to do whatever the make a willpower roll against the enemy HVT is, which he accomplishes. I think it takes him 3 goes to do it because I'm not willing to leave the smoke to get line of sight because there are still some camouflage markers around here, and if he gets dropped I might lose the game. But he accomplishes that objective eventually, and then he is securing the HVT. I am theoretically also securing the treasure. My opponent's treasure is over here. I've got the scout next to it, and that puts me in the lead, but only barely. We've both got from memory, it's 3 points for destroying the friendly beacon. My opponent has 2 classifieds done. I have 3 classifieds done, and I have more things out of the panoply, which means the final score, very approximately, is 7 points my way to 5 points my opponent's way. Came down to the very last turn, and very well played by my opponent. They thoroughly deserve that defensive bonus that they've earned. keeping their head in the game and pushing all the way through to the final round. So that wraps up this battle report. Kind of unsurprisingly, I would say this scenario really feels just a lot like Supplies. It has many of the same characteristics, has kind of similar patterns of play, except that it is easier to make these smash and grab runs to destroy a beacon that makes its way into your opponent's side of the field. Very often in Supplies, you might have the opportunity to go after and kill the thing that is carrying the supply box in your opponent's deployment zone, but then actually getting the supply box back out is often an impossible task. In Corporate Appropriation, you are just making one-way trips because all you need to do is destroy the thing and then you're golden. We saw that accomplished by Hippolyta in this particular case here. And what that means is that, wow, actually the panoplies and doing those classifieds are surprisingly important. I wouldn't be surprised if this scenario is decided a lot by who gets a more favorable classified draw and who is able to pull things out of the panoplies. Now, that won't always be the case, but I think it's not too difficult for quite a few armies to build assault elements if they're willing to make the dedicated one-way trip capable of destroying a beacon held in your opponent's deployment zone. It might cost everything, but I think it's going to be doable, and if that happens, then the game is by definition going to be decided on those secondaries. And so it'll be interesting to see if that bears out. What it does mean is that when you're building for this list, pay attention to your ability to do those classifieds. That's what makes troop variety, not specialist exactly, but troop variety capable of accomplishing classifieds. That is probably going to be more important than I initially expected in this scenario. And my future builds, even in Ariadna, will be looking for probably not hacking, but some way of just having a well enough rounded set that I should be able to. The goal will be, wherever possible, to always be able to accomplish any two of the three classifieds I draw, and then secure HVT or treasure after that. Anyway, that wraps up this battle port. Very interesting as a scenario to play. Maybe a bit less exciting than crossing lines, but with lots to do over the course of the game and a solid rhythm of play. We saw interesting things being accomplished by both players all the way through to the end of the game. Admittedly, my final turn was a bit check some boxes to win the game, but even then I technically went into the final round down on points thanks to good play by my opponent. So that's encouraging. That's what we want from a game. We do not want a foregone conclusion. We don't want a decided game until the very end of the game. So kind of thumbs up in that respect. And I'll certainly be happy to play more of this scenario. For now, though, that wraps up this battle report. Quick channel plug to close out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. We cover Infinity and other war games. We aim to put out a video at least once a week, and so that means, for now, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week for more Infinity and wargaming content.